Okay, so on this one, I'm going to be talking about the CSS utility methods. And what that actually means is how we can use CSS within our code. So I told you what I was talking about, the intro to CSS, on how we can use CSS. I said CSS has to go with a markup language like HTML or the likes of it. So then how can we use it? Okay, if we have a markup language at hand, then how can we incorporate it and start using it? So there are actually three ways. We can use CSS through the inline CSS, or by internal CSS or external CSS. Now what that means is, within your elements in your HTML, you can actually write in CSS codes. That's actually a bad practice if you would ask, because it's not something that is technically right to do, most especially if you're writing chunks of code, much code. You don't have to start using inline CSS, because the main goal of programming is to orchestrate your codes. Okay, so if this is for structuring, then it has to sit in one place. If this is for styling, it has to be here. Then if this is for something else like functionality, all those things have to be orchestrated and placed in their own different section. Okay, so even if you would ask me for the second one, which is the internal CSS, that's still not quite a good practice, although in most cases you would use it. But you can use it generally. Okay, you can actually start trying to use that same code in one file, because what internal CSS does for you, as you can see in the screen, is that you just have to open a style tag, and then you would have to just put in your code within that style tag. Okay, so I feel that's not even quite good. Even you shouldn't use that if you really want to scale a big application. What you should use, which is the third one, is external CSS. Okay, and how that works is, you have to just create a file, and then you have to put in all your codes within your file. So I'm going to implement all of this again, starting from the inline CSS. I'm just going to create a new file. I've done that, index.html, and then I'm going to use the emit I talked about in my CSS series and just create a quick boilerplate to that. So within the body, I'm going to use an h1, and I'm just going to do CSS crash course. Okay, so now the way we can put in inline CSS here, I'm just going to use let me use comments. I love using that, so we know what we're actually doing. So inline CSS, so it's that we have to put in, within the opening tag of this element, we have to put in style, and then we need to bring in the properties and values that we need to use. Don't worry, I'm actually going to explain this when we move to the next one, which is the CSS structure. So let's say we want the color to be red. Okay, so I'm going to do that, then I'm going to close it off with the semicolon. So this is actually an inline CSS, and if I should view this on the browser, this color is going to be red. So let's try that out. So I'm going to go to my directory, and I'm going to open index.html, and guess what? We have CSS scratch course in the red color. So this is inline CSS, but as I said, you don't want to use that. That's not the best programming practice. Let me show you the other one, which is the internal CSS. So, and this, you can actually put this within your body element, or you can put it in the head. But if you should ask me, I think the best place to position this is within your head element. So under your title, you're going to create a style element, and you should have a closing one, which Visual Studio Code gives you automatically if you do the first one properly. So now, how do you now target the element you want to style? Okay, so this is where I'm going to talk about something called CSS structure very quickly, but I'm still going to do it a bit more widely on the next one, which is the main topic for the next one. So you have to bring in three things. You have to bring in one, the selector. That means the element you want to target, or if you're using the class, then you can actually bring in the class as a selector, or if it's an ID, then you have to bring in the ID. But in this case, it's h1, so we're going to put in h1, and then the next thing that comes is curly braces, an opening and a closing one. So as I said, if you did the first one correctly, Visual Studio Code is going to complete it for you. Hit enter, and then within those curly braces you have to bring in two things. You have to bring in the property and the value. Okay, so color is the property, and then the value is going to be within quotes, and the value, let's use yellow this time around, and you always want to end it with a semicolon. So let's save that, and let's just use comment here so we know where we are. So this is inline CSS. Okay, so that's for internal CSS. Now for external CSS, that's the best practice that we should be using, because with external CSS you can link up multiple HTML files to it, and then you get the same styling, you get the same format, and you can actually use that across your files. So to do that, first of all, let's take this off. We're done with this one. So before we do that, we have to first create a file, okay, and we have to give that a CSS extension. So let's create a new file and save. Still within our directory, let's do style.css. In some cases you see some people do css.css, but it's fine, it's all based on your preference. So I'm going to do style.css and then hit enter. It's going to save, and it's been saved as a CSS file. Okay, so now this is our file, but how do we link it in? Okay, so to do that, we need to come in between our head tag, and then we need to bring in this link element. Okay, so this link element is actually a self-closing tag, and there are quite some attribute that comes in. The first of them is href, and the href is actually the location you want to hit. Okay, so for this one we are trying to locate style.css. Okay, now mind you, in some cases you would see something like CSS or whatever directory name slash then the file. What that means is that file is in a folder. So for you to access the CSS file, you have to locate the folder first before you then access the file. Okay, but in this case, it's not in any folder, it's just sitting in the same root directory where our HTML is. Okay, so we don't have to go into any file or any folder to get it from. So that's how we're doing this trade-off. Okay, and the next attribute we need to put is a relationship. So what that means is the relationship between these both is a style sheet. Okay, so we will do that. And then one last thing, which is quite for me, it's deprecated, it's type, but it's still good for the learning purpose to use it. So what this does is trying to tell your browser that this link you are trying to associate is a CSS file. Okay, so when you have this, now you can start working with your external CSS, but we don't have any code right here, and even our body doesn't have anything. So we're just going to do something real quick using the same color we did before, and I'm going to do just write something real quick, the same thing I did before. And so all we need to do, we don't need to bring in the style element, we just need to go straight up and select what we need to target and save. So since we have this here, if we do save the both and come to our browser and then refresh, then we'll see that it's also changed. Okay, so that's that for CSS utility methods. Remember, you always want to stick with the external because that helps you to do things on a general base. Okay, so on the next one I'm going to be talking about the CSS structure. I hope you guys stick to the series, and I hope to see you in the next one.